Before the first light of dawn had even begun to stretch across the horizon, I was already awake, my mind buzzing with the usual thoughts of farm chores and a hot cup of coffee waiting inside. That morning, however, I found something that made my blood boil. As I stepped outside to check on my irrigation system at Red River Acres, I noticed something utterly bizarre. The power meter, usually humming steadily on my barn wall, was spiking wildly. I frowned and squinted through the early mist until, in the distance, a startling sight emerged. A house down the road that didn't quite belong to the community was now connected to my farm's electricity. I knew immediately who was behind it. Karen Baxter, the infamous HOA Karen of our county, had once again overstepped her bounds. Known for her relentless reports and micromanagement of neighborhood standards, Karen had somehow managed to sneak onto my property at night and tap into my electric supply, plugging her own house into my farm's power grid. To her, it was probably just another way to prove her superiority, but to me it was the last straw. In that shocking moment, as I watched the meter spin out of control and imagined the audacity of someone using my hard-won resources for her own gain, I felt a surge of righteous indignation. I'd spent years upgrading my farm's infrastructure, installing efficient solar arrays, modernized pumps, and even sustainable wind turbines to power everything from irrigation to storage. My electricity wasn't free. It was the lifeblood of my operation. And now, thanks to Karen's brazen act, it was being siphoned off to fund her misguided attempt to improve her property according to her own skewed standards. I knew I had to act, but I also wanted to send a message as bold and unmistakable as the theft itself. I hatched a plan that would both expose her ploy and deliver a taste of comeuppance she wouldn't forget. I would issue a fake HOA fine of $10,000 for unauthorized power usage and aesthetic violation. It was a stunt designed to turn her world upside down, to force the entire community to confront her abuse of power. As I stood there, fists clenched and adrenaline surging, I realized that this wasn't just about electricity. It was about property rights, about fairness, and about reclaiming control over what was rightfully mine. Today, Karen Baxter was going to learn that in Red River Acres, you don't just mess with the farm's power, you mess with me. And as the first rays of sun lit up my fields, I knew that my carefully prepared response was about to make a statement that would echo throughout the entire county. Red River Acres was more than just a farm. It was my legacy. Spanning over 250 acres on the outskirts of a small rural town, the property was a blend of modern innovation and old-world charm. Rows of solar panels glittered on the barn roof, and a network of high-efficiency pumps ensured that every acre of field received just the right amount of water. I had invested years in turning this land into a self-sustaining operation, where technology and tradition coexisted in perfect harmony. Every piece of equipment, from the state-of-the-art electric fences to the meticulously maintained irrigation lines, had been installed with one goal in mind: to keep my farm running smoothly and efficiently. In stark contrast to my hard-working operation, the suburban sprawl of Oakwood Estates lay just a few miles away. A community ruled by a strict homeowners association, HOA, with an obsession for order and conformity. Among the most notorious enforcers of their rigid rules was Karen Baxter. Although not an elected official, Karen had become the de facto enforcer of the HOA, notorious for her relentless patrols, clipboard in hand, scrutinizing every deviation from the established norm. Dressed in power suits and armed with a smartphone and a list of arbitrary guidelines, she had built a reputation for being unforgiving. Neighbors whispered that if you didn't meet her exacting standards, you'd soon find yourself on the receiving end of one of her many complaints. Karen's reign of micromanagement extended far beyond mere appearance. She prided herself on being the ultimate arbiter of neighborhood propriety. Every week, she'd file reports on everything from the color of a mailbox to the height of a hedge, and her influence over the HOA board was such that even the smallest infraction could result in fines or public shaming. In her eyes, perfection was non-negotiable, and she was determined to impose her version of it on everyone around her. I, on the other hand, had always been a believer in individual freedom and innovation. While many in Oakwood Estates adhered rigidly to the rules, I embraced a more flexible, creative approach. My farm was a testament to that philosophy, an ecosystem where modern technology met the rugged spirit of rural life. I wasn't afraid to invest in high-quality equipment, and I took pride in the fact that my electricity wasn't just a commodity. It was a resource I had fought hard to secure, manage, and optimize. So when I discovered that Karen Baxter had taken it upon herself to plug her house into my power supply, I was both infuriated and determined. Not only was she stealing my electricity, but she was also attempting to leverage my resources for her own benefit, a blatant violation of the principles that had guided me for years. The idea of someone hijacking my power, especially from someone as meddlesome as Karen, was unacceptable. It wasn't just theft, it was a personal affront. In my world, every watt of power had a price, and every act of intrusion was a challenge to my authority as the rightful master of Red River Acres. I knew that if I didn't respond, Karen's actions would set a dangerous precedent. It was time to reclaim control and send a message that while I valued community, I would never allow someone to exploit my property. And thus, the plan for a fake $10,000 HOA fine was born, a plan designed to shock, embarrass, and ultimately force accountability from a self-appointed enforcer who had overstepped her bounds. It all started on a quiet night, when I noticed a slight fluctuation in my power meter, a subtle but unmistakable drop that didn't match my usual consumption patterns. At first, I attributed it to a technical glitch or a momentary surge in usage, but when I reviewed the detailed logs the next morning, the numbers painted a different picture. There were consistent discrepancies every night at around 2 a.m. With a sinking feeling, I checked my security footage and soon uncovered the culprit in action. Karen Baxter, stealthily making her way along the edge of my property, her eyes fixed on the critical junction where my farm's electrical grid met the main line. The footage left no doubt. Karen had been plugging in some sort of device, a crude extension cord attached to her house, siphoning off power meant for my irrigation systems and electric fences. I watched in disbelief as she manipulated the cables, her gloved hands moving with deliberate precision. The audacity was staggering. Here was a woman who considered herself the guardian of neighborhood aesthetics, now caught red-handed, stealing electricity from my hard-earned farm. Furious, I immediately began documenting everything. I saved every frame of the footage, noting the exact time and duration of her nightly incursions. I cross-referenced the data with my power logs, and the correlation was undeniable. Karen Baxter had been pilfering electricity from my property, and she did it repeatedly under the cover of darkness. Armed with this evidence, I first approached the HOA board. I submitted a formal complaint detailing the theft, attaching screenshots of the power usage logs and excerpts of the security footage. I demanded that the board take immediate action against Karen for her blatant abuse of power. However, true to form, the board's response was tepid at best. Influenced by Karen's long-standing reputation as the neighborhood's rule enforcer, they initially dismissed my claims as misunderstandings or technical errors. It was clear that I was up against not just a petty thief, but an institution steeped in bureaucracy and bias. I wasn't willing to let this slide. Instead, I decided that if the HOA wouldn't act, I would take matters into my own hands by turning the tables in a way that would force their hand. I conceived a plan to issue a fake HOA fine, a whopping $10,000 bill, for unauthorized power usage and violation of community energy conservation standards. The fine was entirely fictitious, a symbolic act meant to highlight the absurdity of the situation and to force the HOA to confront the issue head-on. I began designing the fine on my computer, using official-looking letterhead and legal-sounding language. Every detail was crafted to look as authentic as possible. Citations from outdated energy usage guidelines, a breakdown of the damages incurred by the theft, and a stern warning that failure to pay would result in further action. My intention wasn't to actually collect money, though a few dollars in symbolic restitution would be a nice bonus. It was to create undeniable, hard-hitting evidence that Karen's actions were not only illegal, but deeply damaging to my livelihood. As word of the incident began to spread, thanks in part to my discreet posts on neighborhood forums and the steady stream of digital evidence. The community's reaction was electric. Neighbors who had long suspected that something was amiss rallied behind me. Supportive messages poured in, and hashtags like #PowerThief and #HOExposed started trending locally. People were outraged that someone they had trusted to enforce rules was using that power for personal gain. Late one evening, as I was finalizing the digital fine, my phone buzzed with a message from a neighbor. "I saw her near your farm again last night. She was fiddling with those cables." That message was the final confirmation I needed. With the evidence mounting and the community's support bolstering my resolve, I knew that the time had come to issue the fine publicly. I printed out copies of the fine and posted them on my property, in clear view of anyone who passed by. I also uploaded a video to the community forum, explaining in detail what had been happening and unveiling the fake fine as a protest against the theft. The video was both humorous and scathing, and it quickly went viral among our small community, drawing thousands of views and igniting debates about property rights and HOA overreach. Karen's reaction, when she eventually saw the fine displayed on my gate, was immediate and explosive. I later caught a snippet of her furious rant on a live stream from her front porch, where she declared that she would fight this injustice and make sure I'm not taken advantage of. Her threats only fueled the fire, as the community rallied even harder behind my cause. The conflict was now more than just about stolen electricity. It was a battle for justice and the right of every property owner to control their own resources. Every piece of digital evidence, every shared post, and every supportive comment reinforced the fact that Karen Baxter's abuse of power had gone too far. I was determined to see this through, no matter the cost, and I knew that the coming days would force the HOA board to make a decision they could no longer ignore. In the days that followed, the uproar over my fake $10,000 fine and the evidence of Karen Baxter's theft spread like wildfire throughout Oakwood Meadows. Social media lit up with shared videos of my security footage and screenshots of the power meter readings. Hashtags such as #PowerThief, #HOExposed, and #ElectricJustice trended locally, and soon even regional news outlets were picking up on the story. Neighbors, who had long suffered in silence under the oppressive thumb of an overly strict HOA, began speaking out in droves. At community gatherings and on local online forums, residents recounted their own grievances with arbitrary fines and invasive inspections. "I always suspected something wasn't right with the HOA's policies," one resident posted, "and now it's clear. Our community is being held hostage by a handful of power-hungry individuals." The digital outcry grew louder each day, and the evidence of Karen's repeated intrusions, documented meticulously on my security cameras, became the rallying cry for a grassroots movement demanding accountability and reform. The HOA board, previously a monolith of unchallenged authority, found itself under immense pressure. Emergency meetings were convened, and in closed sessions, board members argued heatedly about how to handle the mounting evidence. Leaked minutes from these meetings revealed that some members, swayed by the undeniable digital proof and the overwhelming public sentiment, were beginning to question Karen Baxter's long-held influence. "We cannot ignore these violations any longer," one board member was overheard saying. "It's not just about power theft. It's about the erosion of our community's values." Meanwhile, my digital petition against the HOA's inaction gathered thousands of signatures in just a few days. Neighbors shared their stories of being fined for the most trivial reasons and expressed their outrage at the invasive nature of the HOA's enforcement. Local blogs and social media influencers began to weigh in, praising my courage and highlighting the importance of protecting individual property rights. "When one person stands up for their rights, it empowers an entire community," one popular influencer tweeted. The local police department also chimed in. In a brief press conference, Officer Aaron Lewis stated, "Our role is to serve all residents impartially. When digital evidence shows that property is being exploited by those entrusted with upholding community standards, it is our duty to investigate and ensure accountability. We urge everyone to report any abuse of power, as it undermines the trust we all place in our local governance. His measured tone lent further credibility to the movement, and soon, every shared piece of evidence added weight to the argument that Karen Baxter's actions were a gross violation of property rights. As the tension escalated, the HOA board announced that a final public hearing would be held to address the controversy and to decide on disciplinary action against Karen. The announcement sent shockwaves through Oakwood Meadows. In the days leading up to the hearing, residents organized themselves, sharing protest banners, rallying online, and ensuring that their voices would be heard loud and clear. Every text message, every post on the community forum, reiterated the same message. Our power belongs to us, and no one can steal it without facing consequences. On the morning of the public hearing, the community center was packed. Neighbors from every corner of the neighborhood filed in, smartphones at the ready to capture every moment. The air was thick with anticipation and a palpable sense of unity. At that moment, it was clear that the battle was no longer just about a stolen what or a fake fine. It was a fight for the very soul of our community, a call for a future where individual rights would be respected above all else. Every shared video clip and every hashtag from the days before reinforced one inescapable truth. Karen Baxter's abuse of power had reached its breaking point, and the community was determined to reclaim control. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown that would force the HOA board to either uphold the old, arbitrary rules or embrace a new era of accountability and fairness. The decisive moment came on a brisk morning in a packed boardroom at the Oakwood Meadows Community Center. The room was filled with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and residents, each one there to witness the final public vote that would decide the fate of our community's enforcement policies. With a calm, yet unwavering presence, Councilwoman Denise Parker stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the hope and determination of a community that had had enough. After an exhaustive review of all digital evidence, including security footage, water usage logs, and the countless testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Parker began, her voice resonating with authority. It is clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Baxter, namely the unauthorized siphoning of electricity from my neighbor's farm and her repeated exploitation of our community's resources, were not only baseless but driven by personal bias and a gross abuse of power. This incident is a stark reminder that no one, regardless of their self-appointed authority, is above the law. A heavy silence fell over the room as Parker continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions related to these violations, and we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such overreach. Furthermore, we will be implementing new guidelines that ensure every resident's property rights are respected. Today's decision is not just about reversing a fine. It is about reclaiming our community's dignity and affirming that our rights as property owners must never be compromised. Her words struck a chord, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a longtime community advocate, renowned for his steadfast commitment to individual rights, rose to speak. Today we stand united as one, he declared, his voice strong and impassioned. No resident should be subjected to arbitrary actions that strip away their hard-earned resources. Let this vote be a turning point, a clear signal that Oakwood Meadows will no longer tolerate the abuse of power for personal gain. We demand accountability and respect for our rights, and we will not rest until justice is served. His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting everyone in a resounding call for reform. Following his powerful address, a senior officer from the local police department presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage of Karen Baxter's incursions and detailed power logs that documented every unauthorized usage. The evidence was irrefutable. The stolen electricity was clearly traced back to her illicit actions, and every attempt to justify her behavior was exposed as a sham. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures, and the full report was scheduled for public release to ensure complete transparency. Councilwoman Parker concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Oakwood Meadows, a community where individual rights are sacred and where abuse of power will be met with swift, decisive action. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our resources and our freedoms against any form of bureaucratic overreach. Together, we stand for justice, accountability, and the right of every resident to live freely and securely." Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom reflected shock, determination, and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community had forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Oakwood Meadows. The days of petty, arbitrary rule enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the landmark vote, Oakwood Meadows began a remarkable transformation. News of the rescinded fines and the sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, igniting impassioned conversations about property rights, accountability, and the role of community governance. Editorials in the local paper, bearing headlines like "A New Dawn for Oakwood Meadows" and "Community United Against Overreach," celebrated the decisive action taken by our community. Hashtags such as #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOA and #ElectricJustice trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand up against arbitrary power. Town hall meetings and community forums saw unprecedented attendance as residents gathered to share their own stories and envision a future free from oppressive oversight. Neighbors, who had long felt the sting of unjust fines and intrusive inspections, now spoke proudly about their right to manage their own property as they saw fit. "Our homes and farms are our sanctuaries," one resident declared at a bustling meeting, her voice ringing with conviction. The atmosphere was one of hope and renewal, a promise that our community would always defend the rights of its members. Within the reformed HOA board and local police department, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, introduced comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and a transparent disciplinary process were established to ensure that every complaint was scrutinized and that no resident would ever again suffer from arbitrary fines or harassment. "Our duty is to protect every member's rights," Lieutenant Reed declared during a follow-up press conference, his words echoing throughout our community. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized, organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns designed to empower residents to stand up against any form of overreach. When we unite, our voices can reshape outdated systems. One local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to embrace their individuality and demand fairness. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was deeply personal and transformative. My decision to expose and retaliate against HOA Karen's theft of my electricity, a decision that forced her to pay thousands in fake fines, had not only reclaimed my property rights, but it sparked a broader movement for accountability throughout Oakwood Meadows. Neighbors, once intimidated by the strict enforcement of arbitrary rules, now found their voices, sharing their own experiences of injustice and uniting in a common cause. Karen Baxter, once the feared enforcer of HOA edicts, was now reduced to a cautionary tale. Digital records of her past transgressions emerged and circulated widely, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands together. Her influence waned rapidly, and she became synonymous with the dangers of unchecked bureaucratic power. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Oakwood Meadows, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the warm glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Property Rights" was unfurled between towering oak trees, and heartfelt speeches resonated with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate not only the victory of our rights, but also the strength of our community, Councilwoman Parker proclaimed, her voice filled with determination. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our shared commitment to defend our freedoms and to ensure that arbitrary rule enforcement would never again silence the voices of those who live here. As each new day dawned over Oakwood Meadows, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of progress. The story of how HOA Karen Baxter's audacious theft of my farm's electricity was exposed, and how I issued a $10,000 fake HOA fine that forced her to pay the price, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the right to live without bureaucratic interference. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Oakwood Meadows, truth, justice, and individual freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Oakwood Meadows would forever be a place where freedom, integrity, and respect for individual property were cherished above all else.